Good evening. We are live. My name is Attorney Vincent Davis, and this is The Secret: How to Fight CPS and Win. I'm joined tonight by a very special guest, Miss Melissa Lynn Martin. Good evening, Miss Martin. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Doing good. What state are you from? I noticed a little southern accent there.
Kentucky,
Ah, Kentucky. What part of Kentucky?
Northern.
All right. And this is a show about fighting CPS, so I would assume you've had a little CPS run-in.
Yes, for 17 months now.
Okay. Start Why don't you start from the beginning and tell us your story?
Um, well, it started in July of 2020 when my oldest son and his girlfriend had their second child, and she wasn't gaining weight or anything when she was born, so they took her to the hospital and they put her in the hospital and they put failure to thrive. And so CPS had to come in, and in August of that year I ended up with my oldest granddaughter, which was 2 at the time, and then the baby, and she was 3 weeks old, and I had them from August of 2020 to May of 2021, and then they got to go back home with their mom and dad. Excuse me. And then in September of 2021, I got them back because the mother had failed for meth and weed and coke, but my son didn't fail for anything. But in order to keep the girls, he would have to, have her to leave. And he wasn't willing to do that. So I ended up with the girls again. And then in October, um, I left, the mom was here and my son was supposed to be upstairs. And so I left to go to the store to get milk and a sandwich for my granddaughter. And when I got back, the CPS was here. My son wasn't here. So I called him and asked him where he was. And he said he was in Cincinnati. Um, so then he said that he thought I was home and I wasn't. Well, I was until I went to the store. So then they called later on that night and told me to get some stuff together for the girls and to meet them at the CPS office. And I was like, no, you can come and get them. And then the mom was like, well, you need to do what they said because if you don't, they'll throw you in jail. So we got the stuff together and we met him at CPS office, and the foster parents were there, so um, they took them. But me and my daughter was sitting there like crying, throwing, just we never been through anything like this, and like was begging them to let us, just give us another chance, and that I wouldn't, leave them with her no more and everything. And of course they wouldn't. And so then that was the start of fighting and trying to get them. Um, the girls were separated. They were not in the same foster home up until January of this year because they said that my 2-year old granddaughter was aggressive towards the baby. And so, but anyways, they gave us, we agreed to the dependency, with no fault or whatever. And so we agreed to that, and they said that if we wanted visits, that we would have to take it to a higher court. So my attorney filed the paperwork for it. And so then CPS retaliated against me and decided that they wanted to void the agreement and go ahead and charge me for abuse and neglect. So my attorney tried to get the de facto custodian to get, so I can get the girls. They wouldn't go for it. Um,
When you say they wouldn't go for it, you talking about the social worker or the judge or both?
both. Um,
Did you appeal that?
I don't think so.
Okay. That's one of the things you should talk to your lawyer about, right?
Yeah, well, in the state of Kentucky, we don't have grandparent rights, so it's like really
But
hard.
I wasn't talking about grandparent rights, I was talking about the de facto denial.
Yeah, so to do an appeal for that,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
okay,
You should do an appeal for that. Or
okay,
you should at least talk to your attorney there in Kentucky about what are the pros and cons of doing
yeah,
an appeal. But, I tell this to people all the time. If the social worker tells you something that you don't like, you take it to the judge. If the judge decides something you don't like, you take it to the Court of Appeals.
right,
Court of Appeals makes a decision you don't like, you take it to the Supreme Court of your state.
yes,
And if you really don't like what the Supreme Court says, you can always try to take it to the United States Supreme Court. But so many people, for whatever reason, decisions are made that they don't like, and they just accept it.
yeah,
And if you don't appeal, that becomes the law of your case. Period.
yeah.
But go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Oh no, that's fine. The attorney that I got was court appointed, and she seemed like she was great and everything, but then she was like, well, I'm not going to charge you, because I told her, I said, I want to hire you. And then she was like, I'm not going to charge you because I believe in your case and I believe that what they're doing is wrong. Um, but when we would like go to her office for meetings and stuff, she would tell me that she was going to do this and this. But when it came time for court, none of that was brought up. And then the last court date we went to was January the 27th. And I have called her, texted her, and emailed her and have not heard anything from her.
From your attorney?
Yes.
Have you tried to email her or call her, text her?
I've called her, I've texted her, I've emailed her. I talked to a couple of her assistants, and they're like, well, we'll tell her, but I still don't hear nothing.
Hmm. When is your next court date?
I don't know. Because there's one for October the 10th of this year. Um, when we went January 27th, they said that, they found me for abuse and neglect. And then they said that we have to come back October the 10th, but I don't understand why.
Well, it sounds like it might be some kind of 6 month or some type of review date. I don't know. But here's the thing: you said they got you for abuse and neglect, did you have a trial?
No, it was just CPS, the judge, and then my attorney and me.
Okay, when I say do you have a trial, did witnesses get on the stand and testify? Direct examination, cross examination?
Um, I got up there. My son got up there. Um, the grandbaby's mom got up there. My other witnesses that I had, the judge said that they was not going to listen to him and sent him home twice.
Huh. Did your attorney try to call them as witnesses?
Yes.
And the judge wouldn't listen to them. Now, here's the thing. On something like that, you should talk to your attorney about filing an appeal.
Yes. We are in the process of filing an appeal for the abuse and neglect.
It sounds like nothing. I mean, was there a court order that the mother should not be left alone with the child?
Just the plan that CPS has you to sign.
Okay, so this was a sign, and did you sign the plan?
Unfortunately, yes.
They still have to prove, well, if you were in California, they would have to prove that you're a substantial danger to the child. And there's no less restrictive alternatives. I don't know if that's the same in Kentucky, but if they're following, rules mandated by the Department of Health and Human Services, you probably have some type of law like that. And I'm not sure what you did would prove you as a substantial danger to the child. That's another thing. Maybe you can talk to your attorney about appealing,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so there was a mistake. So what? Do you lose the child forever because you made a mistake?
Yeah. That's what I asked them. I was like, the crime or the punishment isn't
Right.
fitting the crime.
And guess who the only one that's hurt?
The kids.
Yeah. Do you know, I don't know if you've ever had this situation or experienced this situation in your life, but have you ever lost your parents
Yes, I lost both of my parents.
when you were a child?
No, 2015.
Okay. Imagine if you lost your parents, not even to death, okay? Because I think this situation is even worse.
Yes.
You're removed from your parents, you know they're still alive, and you're wondering as a kid, why aren't you with your parents?
Yeah.
Do you know how devastating that is to a child? And we do it routinely to children every day, of the year in courtrooms all across the country. I don't think, the law says that we're supposed to consider the effects on the child of removing the child from the parent. But I only see myself, I only witness everyone examining whether what the parent did was right or wrong. Nobody ever talks about, well, how's this going to affect the kid?
Right.
You know, and in a lot of cases now here in California, when you want to call the child as a witness, they look at you like you're from Mars and that you're some kind of alien. And, oh, we have the minor's attorney. The minor's attorney is going to tell us what the kids want. And even if the minor's attorney, said, oh, the kid wants to return home, but I don't agree with it, it's nothing like examining a child and having the child explain to the judge so the judge can see the demeanor, explaining to what is actually going on. And it seems like everyone wants to ignore what the child has to say. I do a lot of family law cases, divorce cases, and I've been told just straight out, you can't call the child as a witness. And it seems like to me that it's getting that way here in California, at least, as far as what the children testifying in a CPS case. You
Right.
know, we're just going to assume that we can guess what the child wants and how that it makes the child feel, but you can't guess. Can't guess. Many years ago, this is many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I did a case in Los Angeles County, and my father, not my father, but my client, the father, was in a gang. He was a gang member, and he was an admitted drug user. And but that's not what he really was being accused of. He really was being accused of sexually molesting his child.
Oh,
And the mother, who allegedly, according to the mother's family, who was introduced to drugs by the father. And, she had become a drug addict, unfortunately. The grandmother who had the child worked for law enforcement in Los Angeles County. High ranking high ranking law enforcement official. Now my guy is a gang member and a drug user and allegedly got the mother into drugs, right?
right.
He won custody of the child in the family law court because the mom was just way out there on the streets. So in order to change that, the family or someone in the mother's family decided to report this case as CPS, as a CPS case, sexual abuse by my client. Now, my client swore up and down, all the way around, that he didn't do it. But the statements allegedly made by the child were all throughout the CPS reports, all throughout. So my client wouldn't take a deal. And by the way, I have to confess something. The evidence was so stacked up against him that I advised him strongly to take the deal. He said, "No, Mr. Davis, I didn't do it. I'm not going to admit to it." And by the way, if this is ever found out about me in jail where he was, they're going to kill me. No bones about it. So I said, well, I guess we're just going to go forward with trial, and let's see what happens. Now, because I had nothing to lose, literally nothing to lose, I called the child as a witness. Do you know that several people involved in that case tried to talk me out of doing that? Several people.
Depends on how the child is. It
Oh,
could.
she was like 6 or 7. She
Well,
wasn't old.
she knows from right and wrong, no.
Well, we would hope so. And and at this point in time, California is not that strong in preventing children from testifying in CPS cases.
Right.
It was kind of like an undercurrent back then. Now it's like way out there. I mean, never have the kid testify. That's the feeling I'm getting. But anyway, I called the child as a witness, and the child had to testify in chambers, not in front of the mother, not in front of the father, but in chambers with just the attorneys and just the judge and the court reporter. Well, the prosecuting attorney, the county counsel, goes through the direct examination with the kid about the sexual abuse. And she's right on time. She's telling the story, and I'm thinking, I thought to myself, this is almost too perfect, right? So I got to cross examine the child, and I was very, respectful and gentle. And I learned later on in my career that probably helped the process. I didn't go after her, and I think she had been told that that's what I was going to do, and I didn't do it. So I started questioning her very nicely, and I got to a point in the testimony where I said, and I won't say her name, but let's say her name is Mary. Mary, isn't it true that that guy right there, that he also touched you down there in your private parts? Isn't that true? Now, Mary turns and looks at the judge because I'm pointing at the judge. And she says, yes, it's true. And then I pointed to another attorney on the case who was a male. And I said, you see that guy right there? He touched you too, didn't he? Well, yeah, he did. And then I asked this question, and the attorneys for the prosecution and the attorneys for the minor, they were going crazy, like objection, objection. And the judge like, no objection. Hold on. I want to hear this. So I said to the girl, and let's tell everyone our secret. It's true, I touched you too, isn't it? She was in the process of saying yes, and the judge decided, for whatever reason, to stop the testimony. And he said, I think his rationale was, we've put this kid through so much. So we stopped and took a break. And during that break, on the record, he said, okay, I got it. No more questions. He says, I'm ready, ready for the next witness. So we go back with the girl, and I said, well, wait a minute, Your Honor, I have just a couple more questions. He says, I don't want any more questions about, the touching. I said, oh, no, I don't have any more questions about that. And I said, hey, Mary, and that's not her name, but I said, hey, Mary, um, who told you to say that my client, your father, touched you in your private parts? And she kind of looked up and she looked around. And she says, oh, that was my grandmother. The grandmother in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother told me to say that. And because we were talking about the father doing something, I said, well, just between you and us here in this room, because we're in the judge's chambers, I said, your father never touched you, did he? And she said, well, no, not really. And I was stopping anyway, but the judge said, I've heard enough. And he says, I'd like to excuse this child right now, and I'd like to talk to counsel. Right. And so they take the child out, and it's just the judge, the attorneys, and the court reporter. And the judge says something like, I've heard enough. We don't need to go forward with this trial any further. And for a second, the prosecutor tried to make an argument that, oh, yeah, we still need to go forward. I can still prove this case. And everyone just looked at her like, are you effing crazy?
Right. The kid
F-
just sat and said he
right.
didn't.
So the case was dismissed against my guy. Now, my guy is sitting in jail right now, or right at that time. Well, at the time he was in the courtroom because he was watching it on the monitors. And he ended up telling his public defender in the criminal case what the testimony said. The public defender calls me up. Are you, and he basically says, is this true? I said, yeah, it's true. He says, how can I get a copy of the transcripts? Because I need to take it to the criminal court judge and show the judge. Which he did, but, and the case was dismissed against him.
Good.
Right. But, testimony, unless you get the testimony from the child or from the horse's mouth or from the witness, there's a great chance of an injustice being done. And sometimes, and I think we're all guilty of this, sometimes expediency causes us not to really look at these cases.
Yes.
And you were mentioning this, you had other witnesses, and the judge decided he didn't, or she didn't want to hear from them.
Yeah. She
No, there's all, and the judge can do that. Now it may be wrong of the judge to do it, and you can
right.
find that out on appeal. But, in cases where people are fighting for their kids, in cases where they could lose their children permanently and forever,
Yeah.
Maybe we should be listening to the witnesses and not be so harsh or not draw a fast conclusion, because sometimes you don't know what a witness is going to say.
No.
You really don't. And if they don't get on the stand, but I don't know what it's like in your state, but in our state, especially in urban areas, there's not a lot of judges, and there's too many cases, and They're trying to do a lot of cases in one day, and if you've got a judge tied up in trial, guess what that means?
She's
Somebody else is not getting justice.
yeah. And I really don't feel that we are getting justice because it seems like every time we did go to court, it was whatever CPS said or wanted, then that's what she gave them.
Right. And, that seems to happen a lot. I don't know what the considerations are. I just, I wasn't there.
Right.
But somehow you and your attorney, or mainly your attorney, has to kind of insist on making the social worker and holding the social worker accountable, and trying to convince the judge that they should hear all the evidence.
Yes.
I have a friend, I won't mention his name. He's a lawyer, a very good lawyer that does these CPS cases, and he is very good at convincing judges they should be hearing witnesses that they might otherwise not be willing to listen to.
Right.
And sometimes that's the key. That's the key to whether you're going to win or lose a case. Um, I spoke to someone today from a county in California where, in my opinion, they have a license, or they think they have a license to twist things around. I've done some cases in this county, and it's kind of amazing. I mean, I hear the same story over and over. It's like this: Mr. Davis, the social worker, writes in the report ABC, but Mr. Davis, I said BCD. I didn't say ABC. It's just that little thing.
Right.
You twist it a little, and you twist it with the next witness, and you twist it with the next witness. I used to be an accountant, a CPA, and there was an old joke back then when I was an accountant, and it was like 1980, 1981, that an accountant can pencil whip you. In other words, be dishonest for you or against you,
Yeah.
called pencil whipping. Well, I get the feeling that a lot of these social workers are pencil whipping these parents.
Yes.
You know, I've talked about this case a lot. This happened several years ago. Um, I was taking the videotape deposition of a social worker, and I never used to videotape depositions. And I was talking to a very well-known attorney in San Diego who told me, Vince, you got to always videotape these social worker depositions.
Mhm.
So this might have been one of the first ones, or the second or third one I videotaped. And on the videotape deposition, about 3 or 4 hours into the depot, I'm closing in on her, and the social worker admits to lying to the judge. Admits it, and admits that the reports or the declarations she signed under penalty of perjury were false and misleading. And this is on a videotape deposition that I'm going to use in court. And I spent a lot of time on this issue to make sure that she couldn't later slip out of it and say, "Oh, I didn't understand." So I asked her every which way but, you know, Sunday. After the deposition, her attorney asked to speak to me privately. I said, "Sure." Because up to this point in time, they had offered $10,000 to settle this civil rights case.
Yeah. I heard about this case.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
And he he says, "You've had more fun than any attorney should have in any case." And I kept a straight face. I kind of chuckled like, "Yeah, we're gonna see what's gonna happen with this one." And they ended up he invites me to dinner to talk about settlement. And we went to dinner. He took me out to dinner, and we talked about the case a little. but he offered me an amount of money that I told him I would present it to my client, but I would also tell my client not to accept it, which she didn't. Then he asked me to go to a second mediation. We'd already been to mediation where they offered us $10,000. Um, and we went to the mediation where a very skillful retired federal judge convinced my client to settle the case for a very large sum of money. I didn't agree with the settlement because I thought, she deserved more, but it was a settlement. It was life-changing money. Um, but so the case never went to trial. But I want to tell you this: during all of this, we filed a motion to strike the answer of the social worker because she had lied in declarations to the court, to the judge.
Yes.
So that motion was pending. If that motion were heard and granted, we win the case automatically. The only question becomes how much? How much are we going to win?
Right.
But the case settled against my advice, but it's okay. It's the client's life, client's family, and it's okay. But listen, I have that on a videotape DVD, okay, and I have the transcript. This is from years ago, a few years ago, where a social worker has lied to the court under penalty of perjury. Now, here's something very interesting. There were other social workers involved. That was my theory, okay, in the cover-up.
Oh,
But
yeah.
this social worker testified and maintained this, that she did this all by herself without anybody's knowledge. Okay? Now, what do you think would happen if a social worker's employers find out that she committed perjury in a court case? No less a federal court case.
She should at least be fired.
Right. You would think that, right? Guess what?
She wasn't.
Not only was she not fired, she got promoted.
What?
Got promoted. And I haven't looked her name up in several years, but the last time I looked her name up, she had been promoted to supervisor and still was working in that same CPS office.
She should have been fired.
I tried to alert other attorneys about this social worker lying, or admitted to lying to a judge, and nobody seemed to be that interested.
Yeah.
I think she ended up on a case that I came in on late, and they took her, and she somehow miraculously disappeared from that case, and they put another social worker on the case. So, do social workers ever not tell the truth? Yeah. Do social workers ever exaggerate? Yeah. Are all social workers liars? No. I disagree with that. There are those that say that. I disagree. The problem is that it happens too frequently, and it happens to people, and we take their kids away from them permanently.
Yeah.
Permanently. I mean, that's kind of mind blowing. I think 50 years from now, we're going to look back at what was being done, and we're going to think how uncivilized these people were.
Yeah.
Melissa, did you have any questions for me about your case that I possibly can help you with?
I just my main thing would be like to get this abuse and neglect charge off, and how to be able to see my grandkids, because we ain't seen them for 17 months.
Melissa, I don't tell this to a lot of people, but I've told it to people. And I think you should do this. You should consult with your attorney
Okay.
and think about making a complaint, filing a complaint to the Department of Health and Human Services,
Yeah.
and perhaps the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division,
Okay.
because what the story you're telling me, and I don't know, you and I don't have never met. I've never looked at your file,
Right.
but the story you're telling me, I mean, there seems to be some, well, let me say, peculiarities with it. This doesn't seem right. Like, what happened to the family reunification services? Even if you are guilty of abuse and neglect, I mean, aren't they supposed to be like trying to reunify the child?
You would think, but now they've got them to where the parents have been their rights have been terminated, and now they're up for adoption.
Oh no, you're way deep into this case.
Yeah,
You know, were the kids placed with relatives at least?
just me and my daughter and my two sons. We all live together, and my oldest son lives with his father. And when they took him from me, my other two sons, stood up and was like, we'll take them. And they was like, well, she lives there with you. And I was like, I will move so that they could be home where their stuff is, because I mean we've had them since they was born anyways. I mean, the parents didn't want them, and they said that we wouldn't have proof that I moved, so they wouldn't do it.
Hmm. Wow, unbelievable. You should contact, at least file that complaint with the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. on their website. I think their complaint form is somehow on their website. If
Mm,
it's not, call them. They'll send you a form and you can file that complaint. Okay.
okay.
Can't guarantee you that they'll do anything or get the job, but at least, you got to try that option.
Right.
Got to try that option. Hey, Melissa, we're coming to the end of the show. I want to thank you for being on the show all the way from Kentucky. I guess you guys are 3 hours ahead of us. So
Yeah,
it's about 7:40 here. So
it's
what it's like
10:40 here.
10:40 there. Yeah. Thank you. And I would like you to keep us posted,
Okay.
um, about what's going on with your case. And, there's something that I'd like you to do. I would
Okay.
like to talk to you about something privately,
Okay.
regarding your case. You see my phone number at the bottom of the screen on the right-hand side, 888.
I do. Let me get a pen and I'll write it
Okay.
down.
I'd like you to call tomorrow and make an appointment to have a short phone conference with me, because I'd
Okay.
like to mention a couple of other things to you. Okay.
Okay. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me on.
All right. Thank you, and good night to you.
Good night.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. We've come to the end of the show, and we'll see you tomorrow night on The Secret: How to Fight CPS and Win. Tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Good night, all.